I wanted to come back on today to just kind of update where we're at. And the bottom line is we have a chance again to offer our opinion in a little over 30 days. And it's really, really important, no matter what side of the scale you're on, that you get out there and exercise that opinion option, withholding that one spot that is yours and yours only. It is really important that the numbers match this time around. But I want to come back to a core point that I keep. Well, I guess it's the reason why I do this. Common sense reporting. This is not news. These are not news stories, things that I gather and make up. And this is based on research, understanding, and a lot of common sense, which, as I've done a whole video on, is not all that common these days. So again, these are not news stories that I'm bringing to you. This is an opportunity for you to reflect on the propaganda that's being pushed out and deciding for yourself where the truth lies on that scale. And as you know, there is one truth. There aren't many versions of the truth. There is one truth. And it is very important that you set your barometer to the truth as we get through these next, especially next month, but these next few years as we try to pull back what we've lost through this administration, for lack of better words, because there's a lot of other flavorful colors that I would like to add into that. But again, what I present is obviously biased because it's based on my background, the lens of life I look through, my experiences, my world travels, my education, the location that I am in. And let's pause there for just a minute on the location. As you know, I am located in California. And although I was deeply immersed in the education and propaganda through the schools for many, many years, especially in the college years of a liberal UC school, which are about as corrupt as they can come. And I've done videos on that as well. At some point, you wake up and realize, wait a minute, everything has been a lie. Now, fortunately for my parents, I turned back to my parents for the truth and turned back to the truth of the church for civil guidance, because the civics that I learned there is very different than what I was taught in school as a manipulation move forward. Children are young and malleable. Children have a mind that is altruistic and naive. Those children who stand up and wake up early on have challenges in life, and they're also often a challenge to leadership. They're usually difficult to work with because they don't fit the mold. They're thinking for themselves, and they're thinking, hey, this education is not only a waste of time, but a corruption of my mind. But I fortunately or unfortunately was not one of them. I was naive. I drank the proverbial Kool-Aid. I went to every class I possibly could. I got straight A's. I memorized, I regurgitated, and that was my life. Until I finally started traveling to other countries and realized, wait a minute, the propaganda that we're told in the United States about how great we are, not so much true. The propaganda based on the images created out of Hollywood, not so much true in other countries. But it's also interesting as you look back on your education in the United States, countries around the world are required to study the United States Constitution, politics. Most high school students in many other countries, even third world countries at the higher institutions, know more about civics and the United States government system than our kids even do, and possibly even more than you do. And this is not meant to say that they're smarter. They're provided with a different set of knowledge tools to base their growth on. Now, the manipulation has extended over the planet, and we really got a grasp of that manipulation with John Perkins' book. What was that? Confessions of an Economic Hitman. That was a really pivotal point for the United States, as it wasn't another three-letter agency book coming out, but somebody who thought they were doing an altruistic helping hand across the planet, realizing they were undermining governments and saddling populations with taxes that they would never be able to pay off, economically destroying countries around the planet. Now, this is no different than what the path is the United States is on right now. All this money being printed and sent overseas, that's strapped to debt. You don't get a free lunch here. All that money being given to Ukraine, it comes back into our war machine. It funds individuals and corporations and pads pockets. And a lot of that money going into Ukraine is actually to silence. One of the stories yesterday, and we'll go into this in a different conversation, was the recent Fauci grant given to the same research organization that helped fund the Wuhan scandal. And Fauci's response was simple. We just can't say no based on evidence we don't have. They would sue us. Evidence they don't have, the evidence is mounting that they shut down an entire planet and they were party, if not conspiring, to do so. And yet they just got a huge grant. The misinformation, and this is where I want to peel back the levels. The understanding is not that they just got more money or they were rewarded for this. Is hush money at this period. At this period in time, money given to them is money to keep them quiet. This scandal is massive. The arrests are going to sweep the globe. That money is to make sure that they keep their mouths shut. And this is what we're seeing around the planet. Do you think the movie star that is running the government in Ukraine really is the leader of that country? He's a figurehead, a puppet, very similar to the occupant we have in our White House today. The evidence is there, it's mounting, and it may seem unbelievable to many. And yet the facts are real. We've moved past conspiracy theories and into understanding that those are just spoiler alerts. Wake up, if there's a hint of truth, there's probably a lot more behind the curtain. But this is on you. This isn't a situation where you back down and you say, oh, I didn't know it. No. There's plenty of information out there and plenty of us with megaphones shouting at the top of our lungs. Wake up. Now, the reason that I'm jumping back on now is I've had a number of conversations with individuals that, of course, have been in my circle I've talked with over the last several years, 3 years going through this. And even some of them will say, hey, I don't appreciate that conversation with you about politics. And I'll respond and say, hey, we haven't even talked about politics. We're talking about a global event right now and what's happening around the planet as part of a fact pattern that we need to be aware of. Yeah, well, it's too much for me. I don't understand it. Really? You need to start understanding it. And if you don't, that's fine. Educate yourself. There are plenty of institutions out there that will go down to the core of what this country was based on. It will go down to the core of the very first Chamber of Commerce chamber meeting for Congress was actually a 2-hour prayer session. 2 hours. Look how far we've slid from there today. Now, the notion is we're not allowed to bring religion or politics into conversations. They might cause friction. You might hurt somebody's feelings. At that dinner table for Thanksgiving that's coming up, we're always told, don't bring up religion and politics. It'll cause a fight. Well, you know what? You as a Christian are not allowed to bring up religion and politics. You as a conservative are not allowed to bring up religion and politics. But you as a liberal, you as a dumbass, are able to slowly creep forward with your agenda, whether it is stated openly or not. In most cases, it's openly stated, and that's okay. You're just not aware, you're not allowing the factual confrontation of how it's destroying the planet, and that needs to stop. So for all of you Christian conservatives or anybody on the what's considered the right, although that's a ridiculous sliding scale to me, you need to use your voice. It is your turn to speak out. People need to know that there is a perspective, and people need to know that there is more information out there, because way too many people are still tuned into the crap, being shoveled the propaganda and sipping it up like it's fine wine. This needs to stop. It's up to you to educate yourself and take your own life back, your own community back, and your own country back. Because until that happens, the entire planet does not have a chance to move forward. There are 83 countries right now around this globe that have either collapsed over the last 3 years or on the verge of collapse. Someone has to take a stand, and that someone is not on the other end of your finger. That someone is you. So let's go ahead and start through some of these that I have today. I wanted to start here with this story. This was yesterday. An 80-year-old San Francisco Bay Area radio station, KGO, basic news station on AM radio. It's been there, obviously it says here 80 years, abruptly says goodbye. This is not just an end of an era or a closing down of another station. But there's quite a bit more to realize here that didn't quite come out in the open or the news media. They're saying, oh, they're set aside, they're not needed. No, they had a lot of listeners. In fact, I don't listen to the crap music on the radio. I listen to information like this. Where did they go? I don't have that answer yet, but you know what I do have? Remember the spending spree this summer? The article came out June 8th of 2022. George Soros funded liberal takeover Hispanic radio stations. Remember that? They started buying up radio stations. Now, why? In order to run a radio station in the United States, you need to buy a license through the government. There's only so many offered a year. They're highly coveted. You know, they're actually not that expensive. And then you have to maintain an antenna to have the bandwidth to get out to those listeners. But what's very interesting is if you live by a border, you often hear stronger signals over the border. So for instance, a lot of the signals come in over the southern border. And so you'll hear a lot of Spanish stations because their regulations are different and they can, the airwaves travel. So we hear those signals over our own in that area. But what they found is a Hispanic voting population is not quite voting the direction that they need for this next time to give their opinion. So in order to run a roadblock here, these funded organizations went ahead and bought up a massive amount of radio stations. And here it says 18 Hispanic radio stations across 10 different markets. And the reason they did that is they started to change the narrative. And how do we know that? Again, the actual story isn't as important as understanding the headlines, the direction, and the motivation behind it. I tell my child, anytime you pick up a book, names matter. Understand who the author is and what their political and religious views are. From there, you'll understand the direction of the manipulation of the book. All information is manipulated one way or another. And we can say naively that it may not be the intention of the author. But if you're on a political stage or you're being backed for a reason. Here, news about Soros buys Hispanic radio stations, conservative Spanish language talk radio host to launch in Miami to compete with the Soros-linked group. This mass attack and undermining of a new boss coming in and telling them that they now have to be liberal, many conservatives just quit. And many are dealing with it, quite honestly, under duress, just like the puncture in the arm was. No, that population is not a gimme for the Democrats. But the manipulation, the propaganda is sure ramping up. So as we go back to something like this station, clearly they weren't playing by the rules. And more so, who's now got 8:10 a.m.? What are the rules that they're playing by that the information's going to get out there? Most people aren't even aware. They'll continue to tune into this station and think it's the same manager, same direction, even if the sound is different. Heck, it could change languages. And most individuals are bilingual out here. They'll just think, okay, this is the direction the company's going. No, it's propaganda. So where are we getting our information from? We all know that Jeff Bezos is the owner of the Washington Post. As the owner, he has made clear directives on what direction that needs to go. And over the last few years, he truly pulled the strings. Now, if we go down to the nuts and bolts of it, I'm not sure that Bezos, this is the hard comment here, but he is putting his money in this direction and pulling the strings. And who is pulling his strings? We know the funds came through a Soros-backed organization. the stories are the same. So when an article comes out of an organization like this, you know it's going to be slanted and biased. Otherwise, that person would not have a job and a space in the paper or media or online in order to have their views pointed. It wouldn't be there. And we absolutely know that because of the suppression over the last few years. Now, how far has this gone? Well, after the last opportunity to give your opinion, there was a playbook that came out, and I've done an entire story on that as well. And the playbook was co-authored by the social media companies and the three-letter agencies, and then a number of other government entities. What the government can't do itself, they don't have a right to get a private company to do, and this is their get around. And it was a playbook on how to manipulate the vote in an opinion gathering notion. So here recently, the big talk was on the Joe Rogan show, right? Zuckerberg came out and told Rogan the FBI warned Facebook to censor a specific story. Now, data had already shown that the suppression of this information that had been known by that same three-letter agency more than a year before that as factual actually shifted the way that voters voted. Remember, if you put yourself back in that time, not today, years later, but in that time, we were being told still that the current occupant and the rightful occupant of the White House was a liar, that it was corrupt, he had tax problems, he was, the impeachment attacks were on there, the working with another country. I mean, you go down the list, even that he was mean. He said mean things on Twitter. And I will give them that. He was mean on Twitter. But mean under what scale? Mean to the level that we've seen Antifa and BLM? Yeah, no, not mean like that. But mean in the way that he spoke the truth, and the truth has been validated. And in telling the truth against those who have done evil, well, that is outright mean. And because of that, even today, people still think that he is a white supremacist, that he stole this, that he's an opinion denier. You can go down the list because of all that manipulation that went on. And yet all of that has been disproved factually and presented. And meanwhile, the CEO of one of the largest companies on the planet and a controller of the megaphone from the proverbial county or city square, where everybody can have a voice and everybody can be heard, admitted to suppressing the truth in order to steer an election. According to Zuckerberg, the three-letter agency had warned them. Now, I want to pause here. You don't just walk by and warn somebody unless you know them and you have a relationship. This relationship had been ongoing. They had consistently reached out and had unique communication that gave them a heads up when they wanted information squashed. Now, we know from individuals who have various pages on the site that you can send something to your friends, quote unquote, and some may see it and some may not, because it's the platform, not you, that gets to decide who gets to see it. And even on this level, it was suppressed even more. So in this case, the CEO, Zuckerberg, said that, no, we didn't remove it. We just reduced the algorithm metrics by which it was dispersed. So you hit it. And he said, well, that's better than what Twitter did, because Twitter actually banned it, and we're not that bad. What? This whole thing shows a level of corruption. And beyond that, as you recall, again, step back in time, what is Section 230? All these social media companies were crying to have Section 230 protection, which protected them from all of these scams they were doing. And our president at the time was telling us, no, that is corrupt. They are using this in the wrong way, and it's going to hurt the information that goes out. And all of that got squashed. They know what they're doing. This is a playbook, and the playbook was written and distributed. They stole that election. And we additionally know that not only was this one of the biggest pivotal points to guiding the election with false information, But do you remember how much Zuckerberg spent? I think it was in the Michigan area, maybe Pennsylvania as well, but Michigan primarily came up. Almost $500 million. It was just under $500 million to put up drop boxes with no cameras so that the mules could put in massive amount of ballots that were printed on paper that wasn't even legit. And those got counted to overrun the legit vote. And this is why I say one opinion, one person. Get your opinion in so we have validation that it counts. And again, I'm giving information here. Your choice on how you want to vote. I'm very clear on my vote, though, and I hope that you're clear when you step into that room. So yes, it was this particular story, and we did get information this week. Two things have happened. One is a three-letter agency named here has now moved to share the files with a prosecutor, an AG, in order to start the prosecution. Now, just like other prosecutions, they go for the lowest hanging fruit. So that looks like tax fraud. There's much more behind it, but they're going to prosecute what they can. The dominoes are starting to fall. The entire story is crumbling. And I apologize, I said two issues and the other train left the station. So we'll come back to that if we can. I want to get onto this visual capitalist. This is a very interesting outlay of the newspapers we have. And I wanted to grab the date here. This was 3 years ago in 2019. Who owns your favorite media outlet? There's been even more changes recently, but this was just at least a visual I can give. The top 100 digital news outlets and their ownership. So you can see the link up here if you want to go ahead and dig through this a little bit. I'm just going to scan closely. But if you look at both TMZ and CNN and AT&T, what's the connection there? TMZ is a trash paper. I looked at it for comedy for years, but they rip apart people's lives. How is CNN a serious news station on the same side of, on the flip side of the same coin? We now know that most of the media personalities during the last few years have actually been removed from their job at CNN. The constant negative news network, surprisingly, is not what people want. They don't want the constant lies and manipulation and cover-ups. I'm just going to continue to scan down here a little bit. You control the words, you can control the people. Now, Politico is very interesting because we also have PolitiFact, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, which is a different animal. So here we're just running through this basic journals. Weather Channel, Weather Underground, again, same side, same coin. We're just kind of seeing how they're stacked up here. Everything's owned and manipulated. Did you know National Geographic is owned majority shareholder Walt Disney? What about ABC News? Now, isn't Walt Disney Company a media studio? They make fantasies in their entertainment centers and in the movies. Yes, they make fantasies to make sure that National Geographic is more movie-like, Simba. And so is the news. It's all crafted. Now, a lot of the information feeds from one source. And in this case, a lot comes through AP or Reuters, Associated Press or Reuters. Now, it's interesting. Here's a comment too. Sources. I thought that first one was interesting. But if you happen to have any kind of a machine learning or AI device, like an Alexa device, computers are not at that level, are not sentient. They're not thinking on their own. Now, I have had discussions of the next level of that we are facing. But at this level, they are not. They only feed you what you're given. And if you ask, as an example, the OK Google device, you know, those little minis that they have about God, you're going to get a very interesting answer. And it is not Christian. So this goes through who owns your favorite news media outlets, escaping the news desert, nation of consolidation. If you want to look up the top 20 owners of the America's newspapers. again, you may think that, okay, I work for Tribune Publishing as example, but I don't think that same way. Well, then you don't work for that company, because they're not going to keep publishing your stories, and they're not going to allow you to continue on that path. And they, some of the editors will say, this isn't a fit, but usually they don't. They'll just eventually cycle through. You won't get the top stories because your slant is different. And then when the layoffs hit, your name is just kind of slid carefully over to that column. You don't get to stay if you're not playing the game. So here's another one. This was the opener that I had. I'm going to skittle on up to the top here. This is webfx.com. It's a blog site. You can look here. I'm sure you can find a lot of other versions on there. There's plenty that have been created. What I thought was interesting is this 6 companies that own almost all media. They're controlling the narrative and it's propaganda. The 6 corporations that own almost all media. So if we start here, National Amusements. Have you heard of this person before? Sumner Redstone? Well, he's a multi-billionaire and he controls what you think about. Have you heard of him? Just an individual pulling the strings. Media assets. This is all under him. Have you heard of any of these names? Of course you have. Viacom, VH1, CW, Showtime, Spike, Nick, Nickelodeon, Nick, all of the Nick family. We've got Bet, Soul, the BET, CBS, Epix, Flix, MTV, Pop, Paramount Home Media, Paramount Studios. I mean, look at this. You know these names. Do you not think that this individual makes the ultimate decision of the direction? Now, he may or may not be around here we're in 2022, but I guarantee that he made sure that his voice is still being heard by a successor, whether he's on the board or past, or I don't know. I didn't go that far, but that's where the purse strings are held. So all of this is influenced from one perspective. Find one and you find them all. And they were all pulled in. Now, what's interesting is they also are into the gaming arena. Yes, games are manipulative. And we know this because the military has funded for decades various shooting games. And I'm not going to go down the list there, but just to be aware, in order to get kids riled up, get them into shooting, make it more of a cartoon, and then slide to more of real characters. Hey, it's just a game. No, it's aggression and it's training for, well, we've seen where that takes it. Now, even print media and the internet. So this was, again, several years ago. So there's quite a bit more changes that have happened now. But look at this, even ZDNet or CNET. You might think, oh, I need a software. Well, when you put your information in or you click on that site, that IP information goes somewhere. There it goes. What about Roadshow? Tech Republic. It's all controlled and filtered. TV Guide even. Okay, what about this one? We're going to move on to this person. Now, most of us have heard of this person, and yet look at the estimated, this is annual salary. There isn't a net worth here, but look at that annual salary. How much can you spend in a year? On some level, that doesn't even make sense. But media assets, television and film. Look at all these names. Of course, you've heard of them. So what this tells me is many different directions. Let's say you want to open up a competing direction, just like the individual we started with a little while ago who opened up a competing Hispanic station in Florida. Well, somebody's going to take funding. Somehow that funder will get a majority share. Somehow that funder is going to say, hey, do what I want, or I'll shut you down. Or the other path that's common is a buyout. They'll come in and say, hey, great product. We really like it. We're going to back you. Let's go ahead and put it under our umbrella. They're going to disguise who they are because people are smarter now about where the money flows. And then all of a sudden it's on this list and it's controlled. They either don't fund you and manipulate you, or try to buy you out to get rid of you. And then, of course, we've seen the car crash scenario as well. If you're not going to play the game, we'll change the rules. And I first learned about that when I lived in Chile. I lived in a neighborhood, you know, at the time it was really considered a lower middle class neighborhood. I was just renting a room. I was transitioning locations at that time. And I had heard rumors about the apartment building that lived across from me. And it was very interesting. It was a massive building and had bars on all the windows. They weren't pop-out bars like we have now. They were bars to keep people from breaking in, and they weren't mobile. They were in the windows. You could open your window, but the bars were there. And I had heard rumors that for years there had been controversy because somebody wanted to buy that land. And I can't remember if they wanted a parking lot there or a commercial building. I can't remember, but they wanted a different land use. And the owner would not sell. The owner wanted to maintain the properties for a number of reasons, one of which a lot of the tenants there had been there for years. And they wanted to make sure that those families had homes. So in just the best spirit possible, after offers had been made and they'd been dragged into court and all the different directions, you know what they did? They burned the building to the ground with the people inside. Those bars, they could not get out. Okay, so now the property was burnt down. People didn't live there anymore, and they went ahead and moved forward in the direction that they wanted. It's disgusting, the level of corruption that we face. So here we go. All of these have the same directive. You either play the game or you're not part of the game. And I tell you, it does not matter what you believe. It is important what you believe to the extent of what your values are, and keeping a straight compass. That your integrity is in alignment with your values. But it doesn't matter what you believe as far as the manipulation of this planet, because they believe things that are outrageous to you and I. And unless you understand the motivation behind their manipulation, quite honestly, from a naive point, it's unfathomable. It doesn't even fit in our paradigm. And yet that is what is undermining us. We are so naive that we're letting these things slide by. And it might even be like Catalina Island passing Long Beach at a point of, what is it, 1 inch per year. But it's happening enough. And with their 100-year plan, or if you look at China, 1,000-year plan, you and your generations will be gone thinking this is a beautiful world with your naive nature, and the rest will disappear. So let's continue here. They also have video games and print media. And as you saw here, there was a switch here, television and films there. And of course, they have their internet as well. Now, here we go. Have you heard of this person? He's always kept low key. Again, this is older. But just looking at this info, did you hear of him? It's a name that a lot of people may have heard every once in a while in a controversy, but really that name is squashed. You're not allowed to mention this individual. And yet at the 32 million annual salary back in, I guess, 2019, that was probably 2018 that the actual salary is pulled from. Time Warner, look at the media assets. You know them all. You don't think there's manipulation there? Every single one of them. And how is it the same one that's creating those vampire movies on CW is going to create a different story on CNN? Do you see that the patterns are similar? WB. The stories are driving the narrative, and the narrative is shifting what the facts are being presented in the news, print, investments, video games, music even. Your music is manipulated, and we know that because of a number of conversations that have come up from the 3-letter agencies going into a particular culture and shifting away the way that their music is produced, the way that the lyrics are added, and the manner in which it is presented to the public in a way of controlling, monitoring. We do have evidence that trackers were even put in the saggy pants, saggy jeans that were sold for years. mass manipulation and tracking in order to catch people doing wrong rather than setting them up to win. And of course, Time Warner Cable. Whatever you do is captured through your IP address. How about this one? Have you ever heard of him? Look at what he controlled. Ever heard of NBC? Telemundo? Universal? The Weather Channel? Sprout, how cute that's for kids. Manipulation. Want to see transgender ideas? There you go. Now look, I see as an example, there's overlap. Hulu's here, and if we go back up here, Hulu's here, right? They even share. All of these guys are buddies. When you get to this level, you share with those that are like you. They're all co-shareholders. They share ideas. It's one focus. And quite honestly, this is a game to them. And here you have the Comcast Xfinity. Surveillance right there in your home. And we have ventures. Let's make partnership agreements. These are the ones that are publicly known. Where does the money come from? Where does it go? And there's TiVo. Is TiVo still around? I think that one ended up disappearing, but and you know what really's taken over from that is Roku. Okay, and then we've got Rupert Murdoch. You know, most people have heard of him. He pops up here and there. He only pops up though because he allows his name in the media. He allowed a biography to be written. He allows it. The other ones don't allow that. It's a no-go. This individual, again, massive control, Fox News, right? They do movies one day, propaganda the other day. This is why there was a limitation on the information that was given out over the last 3 years. Wireless groups, and then of course, print media. Here we go, here's another one. This poor sap only made $5 million a year. Right? What were his bonuses on top of that? So there we go. We have a Japanese company. And some of the directions that they're involved in. Now, I didn't see Sony PlayStation here. Maybe you saw that, but of course, look at all the data that's gathered there about our next generation. So total value of the big six. This is again was a few years ago. Comcast 148.2 billion, Disney 88 billion. National Amusements, News Corp, Time Warner, Sony. You know all those names, but unless you know the name, follow the names. Names are important and what their values and virtues are. It's very important to understand what way that information is going to be leaning. Now, I want to come over here to this wonderful news affiliate. In order to carry out the scam of manipulating the news and disguising it as helpful facts rather than, I'll leave that up, I was going to close it, but rather than manipulation, leading it as, hey, we're just helping you out, gathering the news. We have social media companies who went out and grabbed fact checkers. Well, when somebody is there to help you, you ask where the funding comes from. People don't support two sources, you support one. So if you're funding somebody, they're going to do what you want to do in order to make sure that you keep paying them. Right? They're not going to go behind your back or do things that are against your values because then they know that they won't have money anymore. Well, it's the same thing. If you're getting money from, let's say, Facebook, and Facebook pays you because they have an agenda that they're putting out as part of the agreement with the federal government and funds that they're receiving, you had better play by that game or you're no longer there. So we already know of the corruption that happened in social media, specifically with the three-letter agency meddling into Facebook. And one of the key supporters of the fact checkers was through lead stories. And again, we know this information. I'm just connecting the dots. You got to keep being reminded and keep this in the front as you continue to sort through what the truth is. So here it even tells you What we do, Lead Stories is an award-winning, innovative, yeah, they give themselves presents all the time, fact-checking and debunking website at the intersection of big data and journalism that launched in 2015. They'll give you hoax alerts. They'll steer you in the wrong direction. They'll even tell you something that it posted is a lie when they don't even double check. Many individuals have said, hey, this is the truth. I just lost my entire YouTube channel with over 1 million followers. And yet Lead Stories shut me down or posted an article that was against what I was doing, and they never even contacted me to verify the information. We recently heard this from Tony, and I can't think of his last name, Belluto right now. I can't think of it. In regards to that laptop, that silly little laptop. He said Lead Stories produced the article that shut down the internet, and yet nobody even contacted him to understand whether or not the email that he circulated that even had the metadata in it to prove it was true, because that was against the agenda or the narrative being put out there. No, these are not fact checkers on your side. They're gatekeepers or bouncers. And what about this one? One lie after another. They even put in the name fact. There's no fact here. This one says it's been around since 2007. It's an American, it's even a nonprofit. Hey, we're not even take money. We're doing this altruistically. What do we know now about nonprofits? It's a manipulation of the tax system, which in itself is a fraud. But it would receive funding from the government. And here they have government offices in DC where they pilfer money from the taxpayers to lie to you. Again, if a government doesn't have a right to do it, they don't have a right to get a privately held company or nonprofit to do it to you, and yet they do. Now, some other ones are popping up. This one was here locally. I don't know if they're still around. It was such a scam when it started. He even was scamming his employees. But this is, oh, I get it, fake news filter. You could put this on your phone was the idea, which means it's another tracking tool. You can access your news from approximately 1 million news sources, it says, each day, every day, and it follows those stories and rates them as to whether or not it's truthful. But the challenge is it uses an algorithm in order, or here it says a proprietary AI, so artificial intelligence powered fake news filter technology. But once again, what do we know about AI? AI is programmable. It doesn't take a step unless it's told to do so. So whoever programmed it tells it what is going to be real and what is not. And one of the balancing factors that I Get It has is it searches the internet for how many times a story's been linked to, how many times it's been repeated, and where the keywords come from. It'll pull the threads. Well, as we've seen over the last few years, somebody creates a lie, they perpetuate that lie, they then leak it to a news story that might be New York Times. I got caught in this as well. They go ahead and publish it. Now it becomes a fact, and everybody references back to that. And in this particular case, that fact then gets brought into the White House and isn't delivered directly to the individual, but because it was brought in and placed on a desk, they call it notified, and that person knew about it, even though it was never given to them. And yet now the White House is aware of, is party to, I think, I can't remember the exact words they use, to the information that was later debunked when it was fully a lie from begin with. But because it came out from New York Times, all the news stations ended up covering it and repeating it because it came up so high on the algorithm, it got passed as truth. This is manipulation. It's using computers to lie. And yet you don't blame the computer, it's the organization and the way they set up the tool. Come on, wake up where your information is coming from. Now, this is interesting on a couple letters. I just wanted to remind you how many days you have left. These days are getting really hot and heavy. It is extremely important to keep your eyes open and to use your voice. Share the information you have. Wherever you are on that scale, tell people to go research the facts for themselves. What's interesting is I just went to a neutral site, timeanddate.com, right? And I just typed in how many days should we give our opinion? I use the other term, which is in the URL above. But this came up, but right above it, come on, what's up with that? This person loses a Senate seat. Why is that there? Because that person is not a Democrat. And they're trying to subliminally let you know that that other team is losing. And you don't want to vote for a loser because you don't want to be a loser. And so they put this out there to subtly let you know, hey, without going one way or another, because they don't want to show favoritism, they 100% are putting favoritism out there. And this is no different than the studies that show that when you sit down for an SAT or an aptitude exam, you have to fill out your background, for lack of a better word, once again. And part of that, it asks whether or not you're Caucasian or Asian or Black or, you know, whatever bubble you fill in. But studies have shown that the exams that put that on there set people up to win or fail based on how they associate themselves with that category. So if you're forced to check a box that you've been told is a bad box to check, then the rest of the exam scores lower than taking the same exact exam where that information is not up front and not put in that person's mind to cause doubt throughout the process. This is manipulation right here. Be aware of what your eyes are seeing, what your ears are taking in. The next few days are really, really important. Use your voice. And please take a step back. Common sense is not all that common. We are being manipulated at an extremely high level. Apply common sense to the reporting that you're doing and the reporting that you're receiving. Opinions matter, and most of this is opinion, just like my presentation to you today. My opinions are biased based on my background, my education, my experiences. And yet it's the best information that I can come up with based on years of really delving in and ripping this apart to understand the truth. Mine are biased, and I admit that. But you need to take your lenses off and figure out what your values are, what your integrity is, and figure out where do you stand on the issues, as I am convinced on where I stand on my issues. So as we go through this process and we see companies disappearing left and right, you want to understand who is controlling the narrative. Now, what we didn't see on here are the social media narratives. Now, if you're on YouTube, you already know that you are fed specific videos for a reason. The algorithm knows what you will click on, how long you will click on it, and it keeps feeding you because it wants the most amount of eyeballs for the most amount of time and the highest return rate. So you are being manipulated, and it is not there to help you find the right product at the store to make your life easier. That's garbage. They're not out there helping you shop. They're helping pull money out of your pocket, money that could go towards your retirement, to your vacation, to your children. They're helping you alleviate the stress of having to worry about your own funds. Take that control back. Now is the time. All right, thank you again. This is Pink Glue. Common sense matters. Stand up for yourself and your community. I'll be back soon.